All right, folks, we're going to get ready to get started. There's a couple of people still trying to get in here, but we want to stay on time and get us going. So we got about a minute here. So I'm going to do some introductions. Our first speaker is Dr. Shawn Conley. He's from the University of Wisconsin. He's a agronomy professor out there, but he is the state soybean and wheat specialist. So he's got a dual role of taking care of exclusively those two. He's been there, I think, about 12, 13 years at the University of Wisconsin. Before that, he was down at my alma mater, down at Purdue for a couple of years as the soybean extension specialist down there. Does a lot of research. That's one reason I really wanted to get him on board here today to talk to you, because Wisconsin's pretty similar, to us in regards to our agronomics and conditions and maturity groups. And so I thought, the research he's doing is pretty pertinent to what we can incorporate into what we're doing here in New York. So I think it's very important when getting, out-of-state speakers in that there are things that we can relate to. And I think the things that Shawn's going to share with us today are things that we can relate to and bring into our own production practices and management practices. So he's pretty unique, and not only he's done a lot of writing, journal articles and such, but he's actually written a children's book. And if you ever get on there, Cool Bean the Soybean, it's a character of a soybean, looks like has a little mohawk. And so I think it's a children's book that's geared towards, I think, like 4th and 5th graders. But if you ever get a chance, get on and look at Cool Bean the Soybean and see what Shawn's been up to here with a different side of agronomy than we think about. So Shawn, are you there? I am here. Hi, Mike. There he is. Hi, everybody. There he is. So it's all yours, brother. You can share screen and you can go to town here. So we got Shawn for the next hour.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you everybody for inviting me here today. I'm sporting my COVID beard that my wife does not enjoy, but I'm going to keep it till it gets above freezing. So that's what I keep telling her I'm going to do. So I also want to thank Mike for being a good sport. He emailed me last night and asked if I was ready for today, and I said, "What are you talking about? I don't have a talk tomorrow." So I think I freaked him out a little bit, but
he freaked me out. He punked me good.
So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get things started, I hope. Excellent. Can everyone see this just fine?
You're good, Shawn.
All right, awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. And again, thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Shawn Conley, and I'm the State Soybean Small Grain Specialist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I run a very open and informal program, so feel free to ask me any questions as we go in the chat box, and feel free to interrupt me. What I think I'll do is, since I've got an hour, I'll spend the first half an hour on soybean, and I'll pause, take some questions there, and then at the end, I'll kind of switch gears and talk about winter wheats a little bit, and then have some questions at the end. As I get started here, first of all, I want to thank all my co-authors and everyone I work with. Without them, we've got a pretty big team that, hopefully will deliver some information here that would prove fruitful for you in New York. And I want to give a shout out to my grad student, Lindsay Chamberlain. She's actually from Wyoming County out there. She comes from a dairy farm. I believe they're Jerseys, but if I got the wrong species, she'll probably shoot me. I'm actually from a dairy farm myself, and we grow we have Holsteins. But anyway, I digress. I always like to tell people who funds my project, and about 85% of my program is funded by farmers and their checkoff dollars. So I just want to thank the Wisconsin Soybean Board and those farmers that pay into the checkoff program, because that's who basically funds my program and lets me do the work that we do. For those of you that aren't familiar with my program, I always like to give a program overview. So half of my job is running the variety testing program. So here obviously is the state of Wisconsin, and we run soybean maturity groups anywhere from here. The spooner, I call that the tree line. That's where we trap bears that roll around in our corn silage plots. So the maturity groups up there ranging, in that 0.5 to 1.0 maturity group, all the way down here to southern Wisconsin. And this range of counties here, where we actually have farmers going and across the border in northern Illinois to get some early 3.0 beans. We have a big range across the state of Wisconsin. About 2/3 of my research plots are on farm fields, work directly with farmers, some very good farmers. We have some high productivity. It's not uncommon, specifically down here in the southern tier of counties, where we have plots over the 100 bushel yield on an annual basis, just depending on year. So again, this is kind of a range of the soybean area of the state of Wisconsin. Now, one of the good things that, since I have the capacity of running the variety testing program, I also get to look at all these new traits as they come in the pipeline. So last year, what we wanted to look at is do some comparisons. Now, how you read this chart is here is obviously yield in bushels per acre. On the x-axis, we have our different regions. So the combined regions would be all the south, central, north central, and northern regions alone. Okay. The N is the number of each one of these, the number of varieties that contain these different traits. So the blue is the E3 trait. So we had 88 varieties across the state of Wisconsin that were E3. We had 38 varieties that were LLGT27, and we had 117 varieties that were Roundup Ready to Extend. So if you look across the entire state of Wisconsin, we see the LLGT27 and the Roundup Ready to Extends were very similar. They yielded the same statistically. The E3s were just a shade off, basically a bushel and a half difference, statistical difference. But the point I want to make with this slide is that we growers have lots of options out there. And again, if you look in the southern region here, we see that all the E3s altogether out yielded our Roundup Ready to Extends. So the point I'm making here is farmers have good variety options in whatever trait platform they want to go forward with. So that's a good thing about this trial. It lets me really get a sense of what's going on as these new varieties and these new traits come to the marketplace. So everything that I do is put on my website. My website is www.coolbean.info. For those interested in soybean, you just go here and you click down on the soybean research tab, and you'll be able to find information related to all of our soybean research. Same thing on the small grain side. I primarily focus on winter wheat, but we do run some oat trials as well. In Wisconsin, we roughly have about 500,000 acres of small grains in a given year. Again, mainly to support the dairy industry, i.e. Straw for bedding and a place to haul manure in August. So again, go to my website, www.coolbean.info. Everything I'm talking about today is going to be on there if you want more detail. Also, if you're on Twitter, my Twitter handle is @BadgerBean. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. Everything I do and every time I post something new, I push it out either on my listserv, which you can sign up for here, or on my Twitter account. All right. So, we've been talking about this whole idea of big data for a long time, and I think we have some challenges in the ag industry that our platforms don't always talk together. But what we as a group of scientists are trying to do is, trying to get at this big data approach and how we can really use this information that all these different states are doing and looking at some of these national questions. A good example of how we did this is a few years ago, we went through and redrew the maturity group maps for the United States. And how we did that is every state runs a variety testing program like myself. We basically went into all of the databases and gleaned all the soybean variety trial, public trials from across the nation, kind of did a statistical analysis and really trying to hone in. And it's pretty interesting. The last map that was drawn for Wisconsin was done in the 80s. And our maturity group has switched basically a full maturity group later compared to where we were in the 80s in terms of when that last map was drawn. And here's obviously the state of Wisconsin. How you would read this is this dotted line here in the southern part is a 2.5 maturity group bean. So what that says, the optimal maturity group to be grown on this line would be a 2.5 for Wisconsin. So again, it gives a sense, and you can follow that dotted line into New York, where we see a 2.5 here and a 3.0. So again, this is just our estimates. Obviously, you need your local extension agents to work with you and help fine tune that and work with industry as well. But again, we've seen this change, and it's a change, and we could argue some of it could be a change in climate, if you will, but also there's just differences in breeding. I think our breeders, I know, our breeders have effectively changed our soybeans over the last 30 years, where our soybeans today flower roughly a week earlier. And in the maturity groups that we would grow in Wisconsin and New York, so they flower roughly a week earlier, and there's another 7 to 10 days they've added onto the reproductive growth staging. So it's kind of a cool way that breeders have effectively changed the soybean plant, the physiology, to shorten the vegetative growth phase and give us another 7 to 10 days on the reproductive end of the other side. Now, another source of big data is actually working directly with growers. So a group of us scientists put together the survey, and this was funded by the North Central Soybean Research Program, which is basically a collection of the 12 states right here in the Midwest. And each one of the local checkoffs, state checkoffs, fund money into this project for bigger projects such as this one. So we basically sent this survey out to farmers. We just asked for maturity group, what variety, what seed treatments, what your fertility program was, and just basic agronomic questions that any farmer would be able to roll off the top of their head in about 20 minutes. Now, after this, these are the locations where we got data. So we roughly got 8,015 fields from across the North Central region, and that equated to about 600,000 acres of data. So some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today will be coming from this farmer-driven data set. Now, one of the things that we were asked, or we asked farmers, were basically give us the GPS locations for your farm. And what we were able to do then is drop a pin in the farm field. And then we had a team of undergrads come in and basically in Google Maps draw out where that field was. So we'd be able to then pull in all the weather data, all the soils data, and we have all the management data and yield data, so we can really, again, get these comparisons. The next step then we took is we use what we call here these technology extrapolation domains, which I'll be calling a TED. You see here's the state of New York, and we have some TEDs colored in there, and there would be similar TEDs. We see some yellow here in Wisconsin that would line up with New York. So again, this would be something that, even though the data wasn't necessarily collected from New York, if the TEDs align, we would expect a similar response. So it's kind of a cool way of taking thousands of data, being able to compare farmers' fields, even though we don't really have a replicated data set to be able to do this. So again, if you want more information on how we did this, go to my website, you can download it. I'll send you lots of research papers that'll put you to sleep if you really are bored and want to dig into it more. So here's some of the initial data that we're getting out of this is basically by crop reporting district, what are the average planting date that these farmers are doing? And we see some big differences across the Midwest. And why is this important? Well, I think if we look at the fact that planting date is a big driver in soybean yield in some of our TEDs. So how you read this picture is, again, here's the North Central region. We have these different colors or these different TEDs. So for example, 5R is this orange coloration right here. So then we would come over to this figure, and what we see in TED 5R is after roughly April 20th, farmers in that region are losing 0.4 bushels per acre per day by delaying their planting date. All right. Well, we see some of these other TEDs like 3R. I always use this one up in North Dakota. There's really not much of a difference in delaying planting date. You really see a zero yield difference, and that's kind of perplexing. You would think in North Dakota, you would see a bigger difference. And I'll kind of talk about why in a little bit here. Now, we always get this question of, what's driving higher yields in these earlier planting dates? And it's basically some physiology behind it. We're roughly putting on an extra 2 to 3 nodes per plant with these earlier planting dates. On each node, you can just do the math. We're 2 to 3, maybe 4 extra pods per plant. We average 3.3 seeds per pod. And, it's not really magic, it's math. That's where this yield is coming from. It's just more vegetative growth, more pods, and more seeds per unit area. Now, back to this question of why we see these differences, and that's why it was important to get the soils data and the weather data from these different locations. Because over the time frame of where this data was collected in TED 3R, we were able to figure out that the reason they weren't getting a yield response is because that those soybean plants, those fields, were basically 3 inches behind where they needed to be to maximize yield. So the water balance during the seed fill was short, and that's why we weren't able to realize that yield gain from the early planting. So it's kind of a cool way of really digging in and figuring out what's going on over a larger and broader landscape. Another question that we get here is obviously seeding rate. We see some differences in seeding rate, and again, by crop reporting district, we always see some challenges here, and I always tease farmers that I would much rather be a seed salesman up here than down here in southern Wisconsin, where we see some really big differences in what that seeding rate is. And why does this really come into play? So obviously now with this, farmers are investing in new equipment, and a lot of these planters with variable rate technology are targeted toward field corn. But we're just trying to figure out, how can we apply the landscape attributes and really sort out what's going on with our soybeans, and can we variable rate our soybeans? Is it worth the investment? Is it worth our time doing that? So again, taking a little different big data approach, we went in and collected data from all my colleagues across the Midwest who would actually send me data. So we roughly got 21,000 plots of data from the Midwest, and even Ontario sent me some data to look at this. And how we did this is a different way of clustering or pooling farmers or fields together. And then we use this cluster analysis. So if we see here, all of these black dots would align under cluster 1. These red dots are cluster 2 and cluster 3. Again, it's just a way for us to sort out yield environments and see in which environment we can see a higher yield response, or what should our seeding rate be in these different environments, okay? So then what we did is we parsed out in these different yield environments, cluster 1 and 2, 3, low yielding fields, average yielding fields, and high yielding fields. Again, we're really trying to parse out what should your optimal seeding rate be based on your region. Okay, that would be the cluster number, and then the yield potential, high or medium or low. All right, so let's dig into some data here a little bit. So this is kind of a cool picture right here, that in these high yield environments right here, early plant stand or late season plant stand has no relationship to yield. So that's pretty cool. So that basically tells us that in these high yield environments, we have a large range in what that optimal planting rate could be, or seeding rate. All right, and in short, what that tells us is we can really drop our seeding rate in these high yield environments and not have any effect on yield. If we look here in these low yield environments, we see something different. And then we see we actually need to increase our stand in these low yield environments to basically give us our higher yield potential to maximize our yield in these low yield environments. So it's kind of a sense the opposite of corn. Typically in a corn situation, and we're in a low yield environment, you usually drop the seeding rate. This data here would suggest in these lower yielding environments, we actually increase the seeding rate. So let's get and look at the agronomic optimal seeding rate. So what this is what it takes. This is what a farmer would need to drop in these different scenarios to get 99% of yield. All right, we'll talk about economics shortly, but let's look at agronomics first. So let's say we're in cluster 1. We're in a low yield environment, which would be we're under 40 bushels per acre. The agronomic optimal seeding rate, again, this is to get 99% of maximum yield, we would need to drop 237,000 seeds per acre. Now let's go to cluster 3, which would be the I states, good soil in Illinois that's deep and has lots of organic matter in a high yield environment. The agronomic optimal is 142,000. So we see a huge range there. But, are we really trying to shoot for that 99%? Or are we trying to maximize our profit? And I would argue we're trying to maximize our profit. So in that scenario, we see how our cluster 1 in a low yield environment dropped 100,000 seeds per acre in order to what our economic optimal seeding rate. So I would push farmers to really be in these ranges as well. I know there's a lot of variability here. There's some error in there, but I think it really gets at our point of you basically need a bag an acre, 100, and that a unit would be 140,000 seeds per acre. For the most part, that would get at most of the variability and range in some of our fields. And in Wisconsin, we always say if you're in a high yield environment with a potential for white mold, drop that 140 down to 120,000 seeds per acre. And if you're getting into an area that is maybe some clay knolls, some sandy pockets, take that 20,000 seeds from the good soil area and increase your seeding rate from 140 to 160,000 in those ranges. I think that's simple way of looking at this will get you in the ballpark most years and give you the highest probability of profit in a given year. This talks about the risk analysis, and I always like to put this out in front of farmers. This is just an idea of in a high yield environment. We said earlier their agronomic optimal seeding rate was, like, say, in cluster 1 was 154,000. Well, how you read and interpret this chart is if a farmer decided to increase his seeding rate 10% more above this 154,000, there's a 54% probability of a yield increase. So again, it's not a huge probability. If a farmer decided to drop 10%, there's a 40% chance of an increase in yield. So again, I like to put this chart out in front of farmers so they have some options to look at and manage their risk with. Couple quick tools I'd like to share with everyone. This is called BeanCam. This is a free app developed with us and in cooperation and funding through the Wisconsin Soybean Marketing Board. It's free to download. You can either do it on the Google or the Android platform or the Apple platform. Basically go in, download it, set up, do a little bit of calibration, which is pretty easy. Then you go in, figure out what growth stage your soybeans are at. In this case, it's V1 on 15-inch row spacings. And you just line the lines you see on your camera screen up with the rows, and you snap a picture. This is what you see on your camera screen. This is what your app sees in the background. And this is kind of an example here of the output. This is Marion Lund, one of my students. She was out beta testing one of the earlier versions of this app. And you go out, in this case, we have it set up to take 5 pictures. You randomly walk around, take 5 pictures. It gives you your average count. And then what that does is estimate your population. So in this case, our estimated population out there was 80,000 plants per acre. We also give you an estimate of your maximum yield potential. In this case, it's 97%. So I would recommend that a farmer doesn't do anything or think about replanting this scenario. However, we do give farmers that option and say, well, if you want to, here's the replant rate we recommend, which is roughly 60,000 seeds per acre. And if you do that, you move from 97% maximum yield up to a whole whopping 98%. So you basically, with all that effort, you only gain 1% of maximum yield. So again, we would argue for the most part that in these scenarios, you don't replant, you don't do it, you just leave it alone and don't touch it. So if we dig into this whole replant question, give me a second here and I'll kind of walk you through this figure. So how you interpret this figure is as such. So this bottom number right here is your initial seeding rate. So we planted 100,000 seeds, 120,000 seeds, and 140,000 seeds. And this figure or this number above it would be the replant rate. And what I mean by replant is we go into an existing stand and basically plant into that existing stand a certain number of seeds. So we see here that for the most part, we in early planted high productivity soils, I'd say 70 to 80% of soils in Wisconsin, we don't really see any yield difference between 100 and dropping 140,000 seeds per acre. If you look as we go down, this is dropping 80,000 seeds per acre. This is not doing anything. This is adding 60,000 seeds per acre. Yeah, we gained 2 bushels here at 80,000. Is that correct? 3 bushels here. You could argue whether or not that is profitable. Again, at $15 beans, yes, but at $8 beans might not be as profitable. So our general recommendation using this data is as long as you have greater than 50,000 plants per acre in a field and, and relatively uniformly spaced out there. Again, it's not perfect. You don't do anything. You just invest those dollars instead of investing in seed, invest in a residual herbicide in season. There's many options out there to control your weeds, and then leave it go with that. It's not until you get below 50,000 where we see the opportunity to basically make it more profitable to fill in those sections. So again, this is on my website. Feel free to dig into it, and we can talk more about this if there's questions arise. In the last 7 minutes I have here talking about on the soybean side of things, I want to talk about this validation that we did on farm. So remember that trial I talked about earlier where we got 8,000 farm fields and 600,000 acres of data? What we did then is we ran these scenarios and these models to look at if you are in these areas, these TEDs that we spoke about earlier, what are the main management factors that you as a farmer can do to minimize the yield gap? And that yield gap is effectively the difference between what that the genetic optimal maximum yield potential would be. And I would argue in Wisconsin, that's right around 120 bushels per acre. And then what you're realizing on farm. And our state average last year was, well, I'll just use 60 for easy math. It wasn't that, it was 53. So the difference between 60 and 120 is 60 bushels. And that's what we call the yield gap, okay? So what we want to do then is give farmers recommendations. What can you do? Obviously, you can't change your soil type. You can't change the weather, but what can you do management-wise to mitigate that difference and shrink that yield gap on your farm? So these are the different TEDs we were looking at, and these are all the different farm locations that we had across the Midwest. So we had 48 trials, on-farm trials in 2019, and we had 53 this last year in 2020, and we'll be hopefully being able to get over 50 again in 2021. So this is just a picture of one of our Nebraska locations. And how we did this is kind of a systems approach. So we have what we call the reference treatment, which is what the farmer typically does or what farmers in that TED typically do. And then we have an improved strip. And the improved strip is what our algorithm basically told us that farmers should implement on their farm to increase yield. And these changes, they're different based on these different states or these different TEDs. So for example, in Iowa, we would recommend planting as early as you can. Obviously, you don't want to mud them in because you can't have issues if you're planting into, mudding in soybeans just like you do with corn. We plant a longer maturity group bean than they normally plant. In this case, we would ask them to add a foliar fungicide and insecticide at R3 and then drop their seeding rate below what they typically do. So again, see each one of these TEDs has a different recommendations for the improved treatment. Now, how you read this figure is as such. So we have yield on the improved, or what we suggested farmers should try in their fields. And this is yield on the x-axis is the yield in the reference strip. Okay, so that's what farmers in that region typically do. So right here is this red dot. This red line is the one-to-one relationship. That means if on that farm and in that field situation, if it falls on that one-to-one relationship, there's no difference between what we suggested is improved versus what the difference was what the farmers are already doing in that field. So on average, across all of these 48 fields in 2019, we realized a 5.5 bushel yield increase. And this last year, we saw a 3.2 bushel yield increase. Now, the next question, obviously, you would ask is, well, was that profitable? So if we look into these two growing seasons, this is the percentage of farmers on the y-axis. And on the x-axis, this is additional profit derived from our improved treatments. So on average, in 2019, by implementing our improved practices, farmers net profited an extra $51 per acre in 2019. And in 2020, they net profited an extra $31 per acre. So again, that's a good way of looking at this and trying to deliver information to farmers that they can try on farm and really test out if this big data approach, looking at farmers with unreplicated data and making recommendations based on that really proves true at the farm scale. So with that, I think I'm going to stop for a second, pause, have a drink of water, and see if anyone has any questions on what I've spoken about up to this point on soybeans before I switch gears and go into small grains.
Yeah, Shawn, I see one question in the Q&A from Brett Sarutis. Do we need to buy a bush bean that will bush out if we lower populations?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I actually did that work probably 15 years ago when I was at Purdue. And frankly, all soybeans really bush out these days. And why do we say that? Now, if you think about how soybeans are bred, all right, we do these crosses. Breeders generally have very few seed. So what do? They stretch them out. And then so they can branch and they get more progeny. It's how they do these seed increases. They really cut their seeding rates. Well, by doing that, we effectively are seeing a changes in branching. What I mean by that is we did this other study I didn't talk about today, where we took germplasm from basically 1927 all the way through 2014, and we looked at how what the phenology of that soybean plant has done. And effectively, today's modern genetics, doesn't matter if it's a branch type or a bush type or a rect type, those soybeans put on 3 times the amount of yield on branches on today's modern genetics that they did 30 years ago. So I don't think you really need to focus on this bush versus branch or erect stem as much as we did 30 years ago, because even these erect beans, well, what they'll do is they'll branch out and they'll put on 3 times the amount of yield they used to on these branches. But that was a good question.
The other thing I have, Norman Davis, you said, is it no-till? So I'm not sure what that question means. Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. So basically half of my trials are no-till. When we're going on farm, we do what farmers do. If a farmer is no-till, we do all our work no-till. If a farmer is conventional till, we do all our work conventional till. In terms of these 8,000 farm fields and that 600,000 acres of data, I mean, obviously it's region specific versus no-till, but we have good data on what works best on no-till and what works best on conventional till. So if you want to dig into that publication, it's on my website, you can go. But I'm a huge no-till proponent, and if I can, I'm trying to switch my whole program to no-till. That's the plan.
Okay. Another one here. How do you feel about seed populations at higher elevations? Increase it due to Gurgi days. That we have land between 1,500 and 2,000 foot elevation.
That's a good question. I don't know if I can answer that. I know Dell's on here and he sees more of that in Pennsylvania. We don't really have those elevation changes, but I would suggest, I guess, just thinking off the top of my head, I would think as elevation increases, you would probably need a higher seeding rate, I guess, and then that would be my thought, but I don't have a good feeling for that. Mike, do you have an answer for that? I don't know.
I don't. I mean, we obviously, we get started a little later in those. If we look at soil temperatures, we're usually colder up there, and so we have a little later start, obviously into the south of us here, and we also end a little sooner, so we get those frosts a little sooner in the fall. But yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. Just what the weather is going to do is going to really depend some of that. So, guys, do you use soil temperatures for guidance on planting date?
So that's you guys have very good questions here. So soil temperature, not really. And here's the reason why. So all the early physiology work looking at the the base temperatures for when soybeans and corn emerged were done in the 60s and 70s. And they really didn't focus much on soybeans because we were planting beans in June back then. And by default, we have really seen that they've just used 50 degrees Fahrenheit for a base temperature because it's, we've always traditionally planted corn first. We use 50 for corn, and that's just been the default for soybean. Where in fact, if you look at some of the more recent work, it's, that base temperature for germination is less than 50 for soybean. Some would argue it's 46, some would argue it's 48, but it is less than soybean. And, you can get imbibitional chilling with with soybean, but the duration that it needs to be, basically that plant or that soybean seed can be in the ground before it gets imbibitional chilling. Chilling is a lot shorter than it is for corn. So that soybean seed is a lot stronger and more hardy than I think we give it credit for. And specifically, it's much stronger and hardy than corn. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I'll be out there planting if the soil temperature is 46 degrees and the soil is fit, I'll let it rip. But that's just me.
I agree. If it's good to plant, you go. There's a couple more questions, but let's answer one more and we'll save the rest for the end here. From Dan Kehoe, does maturity group and seeding rate have a correlation? I.e., early maturity group need a higher seeding rate versus a later group?
Another good question. So yes, typically what we see is that if you have an earlier, so we'll say if we're in a specific area. So the North Dakota, they recommend a higher soy seeding rate, and they're usually in a 0.1 to a 0.5 maturity group bean up there. So they recommend another 20 to 30,000 over what we do in Wisconsin, which is that, in that 1 to 2 maturity group bean where we're targeting that 140. But I mean, if you were in like an area, let's say you want to plant the optimal soybean maturity group in this area is a 2.5, and you want to put a 1.0 out there in that environment, then yes, you need to increase your soybean seeding rate in order to maximize yield. Just because you effectively need more nodes out there, because what you're trying to drive is seeds per unit area. And you're not going to get the nodes in the earlier maturity group bean that you would have with later, so you need to get more basically plants out there to drive that node number up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's good. There's a couple other questions, but we need to move on here with your wheat, your small grain portion, and hopefully we can come back to the end and answer a couple more of these other ones here.
Sure. And by the way, hope Bernie Sanders says hi. This is a little bit dated, but that meme made me laugh, so I had to put that in there. Anyway, okay, so let's get into this profitable, and this would be the same thing as maximizing yield. I tried to look at we're maximizing yield as well as maximizing profit. All right, so I'll walk through this one a little bit. So obviously, like with soybean, genetics is a big role. My program also runs the Wisconsin winter wheat performance trials. And you see these are our locations, and these just line up with where our dairy industry is in general, where we see most of our winter wheat acres are planted. Obviously on the soybean side, if anyone's interested, you can go to my webpage, and I'm sure there are very similar varieties of are planted here as are in New York. So you can kind of look at your local data and our data and kind of get a sense of which varieties are best across a larger region. Obviously, yield is important, but in Wisconsin, test weight is a big driver in our farmers' decisions, as well as, Fusarium head blight resistance. We'll talk a little bit more about managing that in a bit. Now, in our state, obviously crop rotation is important, and it's important everywhere, but it's sequence, and I'll walk you through this. So the best rotation for all three of our major crops, corn, soybean, wheat, is the corn, soybean, wheat rotation in that manner. If we see here, I'll kind of show you this. So this is data from our long-term rotation study. Basically, it's been in place for over 30 years now, I believe. So this is what continuous corn over 30 years of growing will go 192 bushels per acre, okay? In the corn, soybean, wheat rotation, that corn yield is 11% higher. If it's corn, wheat, soybean, it's only 2% higher, okay? So again, we see a big difference here with this rotational sequence. Same thing on the soybean side. We see compared to continuous soybeans, the corn, soybean, wheat rotation is best for the soybean, and it's 26% higher yield than continuous soybean. And it's true for winter wheat as well. This is continuous winter wheat. We see wheat in the corn, soybean, wheat rotation is 129% higher than the continuous wheat, or basically 10 bushels higher than the corn, wheat, soybean. So again, crop rotation is important, but also sequence is important, at least for the farmers that we see here in Wisconsin. What I want to quickly do, as we walk through today, is talk about specific management practices. I'm going to talk to specific growth stages, which are key for everyone to go that. So this is a publication on my website. It's basically a winter wheat development and growth staging manual. Feel free to download it, print it off for free. We're going to basically speak at the Feek scale. There's different scales out there, but I'm just going to use the Feek scales, for those are the ones that we mainly use. Again, we strongly recommend you plant new seed every year. Just because of the challenges we see with Fusarium head blight and Don and some other challenges with test weight. But we know that given the recent prices, you can't always plant new seed. So we recommend if you need to plant save seed, you first of all check if it's legal to plant it. A lot of the new genetics are available out there. You can't do it. Perform a germ test and put a seed treatment on it if you're treating your own. But again, we strongly recommend that you plant new seed every year, okay? We also recommend, at least in Wisconsin, we use a fungicide seed treatment. There's a publication that my my colleague Damon Smith puts out. It's called What's on Your Seed. You can download that, and it basically tells you, based on these different companies' names, what active ingredients are in each seed treatment. We strongly recommend a fungicide seed treatment on winter wheat in Wisconsin. So our target seeding rate and planting date is roughly September 20th to October 1st. That's when we really try to push farmers in Wisconsin to get their wheat planted, is in that range. After October 1st, and I'll show you some data here, we start to lose yield at a pretty rapid pace. We also recommend farmers drop 1.75 million seeds per acre. We did some work earlier that we saw roughly a 2.3 bushel yield increase by going from 1.5 million seeds to 1.75. If that's not economical for you, you can stick in that 1.5, 1.25, but for maximizing a driving yield, we recommend at 1.75 in this window of planting between September 20th and October 1st. We recommend that wheat should be planted between 1 to 1.5 inches, regardless of planting date. I know we typically see farmers that can't get their winter wheat in, so they want to just place it at a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, and that just results in poor winter survival and some challenges. And in fact, most fields that I walk in the spring that are thin and look that look ugly are due to shallow planting. As an agronomist, you can go out and make our recommendations, and what you can see here is you're going to be looking for this structure. It's called a subcrown internode. We see here there's the seed remnant from last fall's planting, and the crown is sitting right on top of that. So that tells you right here that this seed was placed about a 1/4 inch deep. Okay, and we see only one tiller on this plant. This one, same field, same planting location, was planted at proper depth, and you can measure it here. That would be about 1 inch deep. We have an extra tiller on that. So again, what I really recommend is you get that weed in that 1 inch. And if you are a agronomist, crop consultant, it's pretty easy to identify the next spring by looking for the structure, how deep that winter wheat was actually planted. So if we look here between our optimal planting dates, we try to target farmers to get in there September 20th to October 1st. And here's our yield penalty starting at roughly September 25th right here. We're losing roughly a bushel per acre per day. We delay our planting date past that optimal window. And we have a lot of wheat going at the end of October here. And if we see here, we've lost roughly 22 bushels going in at end of October. Again, if you need the straw, if you need to get it in to get some cover, that's fine. Just realize that you're going to take a yield hit by getting that winter wheat planted that late. One of the things we're really trying to do is get farmers to think ahead of time if they're going to put winter wheat into the rotation. And again, the optimal crop rotation is corn, soybean, winter wheat. So this last year we went and took all the varieties, the soybean varieties planted in our northern region. We put them in the southern region just to look to see what our yield potential of these early maturity group beans are. So again, our recommendation in southern Wisconsin is a 2.5. So here we have some beans that were a 0.4 bean all the way up to a 1.5 bean. And the thing here we see is we were still able to get 80, 90 bushel beans with these early maturity groups. So again, I'm not telling farmers to do this. It's 1 year data, one location, but I think it gives farmers an opportunity to really, if they're trying to make this whole system work, to be able to maybe shrink that maturity group bean a little bit and get it in so you can get it out and planted in time to plant your winter wheat to maximize your winter wheat yield. So here we have some estimated winter wheat planting date based on what our relative maturity group bean is. So what I mean by that is we went out and physically measured our 0.5 bean hit physiological maturity, R8 soybean, on September 3rd, okay? And roughly it takes 10 days, if the weather is kind to us, to go from physiological maturity all the way to combine ready. So this just gives us an estimate that farmers can use to look at when if all the stars line, which they never do, but at least an estimate of when they can estimate when they can plant based on what that relative maturity group would be. So again, this is for information that anyone is interested is on my webpage and my blog article too. All right, so after October 1st, we recommend that farmers go out and start jacking up their seeding rate. So here's our seeding rate range from October 1st through October 10th. We start pushing farmers to put out 2 million seeds, and once we get into mid to late October. The main reason for that is with these late plantings, we're not going to get the tiller formation that we want in the fall. So how do we effectively put more tillers out there? Well, we effectively just put more seed out there to at least get boost our tiller number by having just at least one main stem on those plants by increasing your seeding rate. I get this question all the time. I get it this year. We go out there, we plant our wheat on November 1st. Is it going to vernalize? Is it going to survive? And physiologically, all this wheat has to do is effectively imbibe water and start the germination process, and then it will fertilize and it'll be just fine. See, a lot of times, not this year, but in some years where we'll get winter wheat planted in November and we have snowfall on it, you don't see anything, and then we'll have a warm spell come in and melt some of the snow in February, and then you can just see these little green spikelets out there. So again, remember the effective temperature for this germination process and growth and development for wheat is pretty small, or it's effectively just above freezing. That plant will continue to respire and continue to grow. So again, as long as it germinates process, you can plant it late and it will vernalize and be just fine. I'm not going to speak too much of the time here about the vernalization process and why it's important, but if you want to, you can dig into this a little bit more in your own. In terms of the springtime, the green up stage is when we recommend farmers put their nitrogen rate out. Since we grow soft red winter wheat, protein is not really important per se. We're looking at that 8 to 9% range, I believe, is what we're focusing on for soft red winter wheat. So we've done a lot of work with Carrie Lebowski, our soil fertility specialist here, and we don't really see a benefit except in a really wet year of going out past green up. So this is the timing where we recommend nitrogen go out. How we make recommendations here is based on what your soil type is and what your previous crop was. And we also factor in the nitrogen to wheat price ratio. So again, the optimal crop rotation is corn, soybean, winter wheat. So if the corn nitrogen, the nitrogen to wheat price ratio is 0.75, we recommend farmers put out on average 50 pounds of N. So that range is between 40 and 60, but you all probably had to do it different there. Just follow your recommendations within your state. I just want to give you an option of what we do is we basically just focus it nitrogen application right at green up, and then we don't really do much after that. Fix 6 is this jointing, and the main reason I bring this one to everyone's attention is this is when a lot of the herbicide labels end that you can't apply a herbicide past this growth stage. And this is when you get wheel track damage because the jointing is occurring when you drive a sprayer through a field or a tractor through a field. You start breaking stems past this Fix 6. So I just bring that to your attention for herbicide label and also the wheel track damage aspect at this growth stage. Fix 9, this is our target timing for foliar fungicides. Damon Smith, our plant pathologist, he's done a lot of work with these early fungicides at Fix 6, at green up, and we really don't see a lot of benefit at these earlier timings. So throughout, we're scouting, we're seeing these lesions. Stripe rust is a big one that we've been battling the last few years. Moving up onto that flag leaf, that's the timing that we really want to focus is this Fix 9, or when that flag leaf is fully extended. That's the optimal timing for those fungicide applications. The other big challenge we deal with on an annual basis here is Fusarium head blight or scab. And this is where the optimal timing for that is Fix 10.51. So if you're out scouting your field, you go out, you can see these anthers begin to basically protrude from that wheat head, this is the timing for when those head scab applications are going out there. So again, just want to give you all a diagnostic to when the best time to go out and make those fungicide applications for targeting Fusarium head scab. Now, I kind of want to talk about in the last 5-10 minutes I got here on winter wheat is this intensive wheat management project that we've just finished up. And this is published if anyone wants to read the journal article. The extension version of this is on my webpage, www.coolbean.info. And so I'm going to walk you through this, this work that we've done. So what we really wanted to do is look at these different management levels. So we had what we would call a base level of management. Then we would have like a medium level of management and a high level of management. I'll kind of walk through these. So these are how you would read this is these are the different years. These are the different rates of these products that we put out. So for example, in 2018, we put 55 pounds of nitrogen out at green up for the base level. Then we put 55 out at green up and then came back right before Feek 6 with a 17-pound split. So we tried some different splits. We tried different higher rates. You know, we were really trying to focus in on what we could do to drive these yields. We tried micronutrients. We put a growth regulator out there where we're really trying to push our fertility levels. We had fungicides once at Feeks 9. We also had fungicides twice. We had one out there at Feeks 9 and at Feeks 10.51. So again, really trying to focus in on the on these different systems. All right. So this is kind of tough to read. I just wanted to kind of briefly talk about the disease information in here. And for the most part, in these given years, I mean, we didn't have a stripe rust epidemic or anything else. The fungicide timings at the Feeks 10.51 did just about as good a job as doing a 2-pass at Feeks 9 and Feeks 10.51. So guys, the point here is with your main problem that you're battling is Fusarium head scab, and maybe you have some minor diseases hanging out. It looks like that Feeks 10.51 is the optimal timing just for a 1-pass operation in wheat. At least that's what we've kind of settled in on here in Wisconsin. So if my grad student put this up on a figure for farmers, I would say that is ridiculous. You should never show something like that. But I always guess I don't always practice what I preach. So anyway, how you read this table here is pretty simple. We have our different years across the top, 2016, 2017, 18, and 19. We have our different levels of management, our current, our mid-level, and our high level. Then we looked at all these different varieties. So the things I want to focus in here, again, there's a lot of stuff, you know, you can get lost in here pretty quick. But on the right-hand side, the important thing we want to look at is how do these varieties perform? And this is where it really is key to tell farmers that, you know, variety selection matters. We see roughly a 30 bushel yield difference from our lower yielding varieties to our higher yielding varieties. So it really shows the idea of basically that's variety selection. The other point down here is that management matters. We see in all of these years, this mid-level increased yield by roughly 7 to 10 bushels per acre. All right. Then we see in some years a little bit of a bump from that high level, but remember that high level, we'll talk about economics and profit a little bit. There's a lot more times, a lot more trips across the field, a lot more products. Now, I said earlier how important yield was, but also test weight. We have a challenge meeting our base test weight here in Wisconsin on an annual basis. I mean, you see some pretty severe dockage some years. So again, we see the differences here in variety selection in terms of test weight. So we see here our lowest our lowest test weight versus our highest. That's roughly a 0.5 bushel, 5-pound test weight difference, which, you know, point I'm trying to make here is we need to do this good job of balancing test weight and yield to manage the profit in order to not get that dockage at the elevator. And again, I'll show some of that in the next couple of slides. The other cool point we see here is this management level does influence our test weight. In some years, we see as much as a 3-pound increase in test weight just based on our management level. So again, variety selection, management, it's all good things to think about for both yield and test weight. And how do we balance that all out? So what we did here is we ran a frequency of price deductions, or basically, being docked at the elevator by management. So if we focus in on no test weight deduction, I think we see 37% of the time using the mid-level management, we did not see any test weight dockage, which is pretty cool. 31% of the time, if we saw dockage, it was 8 cents, and 31% of the time it was 10 cents. We compare that to our current level without increasing our management, we would see 50% of the time we would get a test weight reduction. Now let's go down here to Don. In these years, again, they weren't terrible scab years, but using the mid-level management, 100% of the time we did not get any Don deduction at the elevator. Whereas in the current management, we would get a Don deduction of about 20% of the time, and roughly 17% of the time, it was a 20-cent Don deduction. So again, it's pretty critical and important to know how management affects this deduction and what the odds are of getting a deduction at that elevator. Now, the last thing we want to do is now we want to pool this all in and look at profit. And what we found is this mid-level management system gave us the highest profit. All right. So on a net per acre basis, our net profit running the mid-level management program was $263.90. So remember, the high level, we threw a lot more stuff at it, and we did get higher yield, but due to those added costs and trips across the field, we were at a lower net profit. So we're trying to hone farmers into the kind of more of this mid-level management in terms of making these decisions to maximize not just yield, but most importantly, profitability. And another cool added benefit in Wisconsin is the fact of straw yield. And in some years, straw yield is what gives farmers the profit across Wisconsin. And what we found in the years of this study is this moving a farmer from that current level up to a mid or high level of management, we gain an extra half a ton of straw on a per acre basis. This is dry matter. So that's a ton of added value that comes into this system and these decision-making processes. This is not just higher yields, but also higher straw yields, which is really critical for us in Wisconsin, some of these down years in terms of where that wheat price might be falling. So with that, I think what I'm going to do is I'll pause here. I think I'm on time. Good, I got 4 minutes left, and I'm going to see if there's any questions. And again, here's my webpage, www.coolbean.info. There's my Twitter, @BadgerBean. And yeah, and there's Cool Bean, the soybean. Any questions?
All right. Tell you what, here's one for Shawn. Are you using cover crop following the wheat in a corn, soybean, wheat rotation?
Yeah, we always put a cover crop following our wheat because generally that's where our manure is going out. We'll generally put, it just depends on what we're doing, but we always put a cover crop out there. We usually go with cereal rye just because it's cheap and it's effective.
All right. Okay, Dave, I'll tell you, in New York State, the recommended rates for soft red winter wheat is 1.2 to 1.3 million seeds and 1.5 for straw. Surprised to hear 1.75 to 2 seeds. I'm wondering what your average elevation is there. Dave's big on elevation. And would you still advise those rates around here?
Well, I mean, I would because I'm trying to remember, what was his name? He retired 4 years ago.
Bill Cox.
Bill Cox. If would he have been the person that made those recommendations? Bill?
Yes.
Yeah, I trust Bill. If Bill says it's 1.3 there, I wouldn't go against Bill, because even in retirement he might come out and hurt me. So we made the switch mainly just again, it was just a 2 bushel. That's why I tell farmers, if you can't put an extra 250,000 seeds out there for 2 bushels, then don't do it. Stick with your 1.5. But again, it's just because straw is such an important part of our system here, that's another big driver of why we have a little higher seeding rate.
Andy Miller asks, only Husky herbicide?
I do not like to give recommendations of specific products, but I use Husky on all my wheat.
I recommend it.
I'm not making an endorsement for it, but that's what I used in this trial.
Well, we have a special local needs for Husky just for mare's tail.
Okay. The reason I do that is, sometimes these growth regulators, every year I have a co-op misapply a growth regulator on late past the growth stage where it should be applied, and we see crop injury. I don't even have to get out of the car anymore. I know what growth regulator damage on wheat looks like going 50 miles an hour down the road. So I just don't, I'm just cautious in my experiments. So again, I'm not endorsing. I don't want to have angry emails or phone calls.
No, it's used here. We have, usually Harmony Extra plus Husky is pretty standard fare. Pete Tracy asks, copper. Yesterday, our grower from Michigan talked about applying copper early as sort of a fungicide as well.
Yeah, so we looked at copper years ago, and so I don't know what happened about 8-9 years ago. Powdery mildew just disappeared from the state of Wisconsin. So we don't have powdery mildew. If we do, it's at really low levels. I think that was the target for that product. And even when we did have powdery mildew at that green up or early growth stage with that herbicide, we really didn't see very good efficacy with it. So again, if it works up for you all, great. But again, we didn't really see it. It typically for us, again, we were targeting powdery mildew, and that stays so low in the canopy that it didn't really move up fast enough that we would have to worry about it. So I know it's cheap, but we just didn't see good efficacy. At least in those early timings, what I'm talking about is week 6 or earlier.
Okay, that was it for wheat. I want to go back a couple of these soybean ones up here. Any 30 intro data as far as planting rate?
Yeah, so funny enough, our 30-inch and our 15s align pretty well to each other. Generally what we see, okay, this is historically, if we're planting traditionally in mid-May, we generally see a yield difference between 30s and 15s, it's just the row spacing effect. But we really don't see any break in terms of if there's a seeding rate by row spacing interaction. We can't really pull that out. What we have seen with our on-farm data with all those farmers, that if we're planting early, and by early we're talking last week in April, first week in May, that at least in their southern part half of Wisconsin, we don't see that yield penalty because of row spacing anymore. It still exists in North Dakota. Obviously, as you move further north or maybe at a higher altitude, you might see that, but we really don't see that if you're planting early. Obviously, if you're planting mid-May and later, then yes, go as narrow as you can go.
Okay, let's do one more here and we'll take a break. What would influence where beans begin to set pods into relation from height of the ground? Is it weather or variety?
It's seeding rate and maturity group. So that's one of the things that I've started doing, because we have farmers asking about these really low seeding rates. By low, I mean starting at 80,000 plants per acre. That's where they're going to start dropping seed at. And if you decrease your population, below that suboptimal 100,000, we do see that those pods being formed lower on that plant. And also, if you're planting a maturity group that's way earlier than recommended for your region or for that environment you're in, then we see those pods being dropped at a lower level too. So it's population and maturity group are the two big drivers we see.
All right. Awesome. Well, Shawn, I tell you what, it's been great. A lot of information. And like I said, you had the links there to some of your web pages there for wheat and for soybean. If folks want to delve a little bit more into that, or whatever you talked about today, find out what some of those are. Again, folks, this is recorded, so at some point we will put this out for folks that are on the call to listen to. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Take care. All right, folks, it's 4 after 11. Let's take 5 minutes break. All right. It's up.
All right.
2020 PA soybean contest results.
Yep.
So you just tell me when you want me to switch it.
Okay. I'll give you the nod then. So everybody's ready. So I got about 15 minutes to get back on track here.
Yeah.
Okay. So just for everybody's knowledge, my computer battery just must have got short and it died. So I'm actually now on my cell phone. I don't even know if you can see me.
We can see you.
But I'm going to try to review some of what our on-farm network, what we're learning, as well as update you too on our contest results and how they relate together are kind of tight there. But our soybean contest, we started back in '92 when the soybean board was first created. And I started in '93. And the first thing that John Yoakum, our research person down at the lab, said that this was my next duty. So I've been doing it since then. And we typically get about 40 growers, and you can advance to the next slide. Mike, you can flip her forward.
Why is it not? Wrong way. There we go.
And so if we look at the Pennsylvania state average yields, and you start to analyze our trends, back when I started in '93 is when I started keeping records, and I figured if I'm going to be involved in a contest, I want to get some information that we could use for production. And so we started keeping records, but here's the state average records since that time. And so it's going up at about 1/2 bushel per acre per year. And it's linear, so it's going up. And if you look at our contest, the next slide, please. If you look at our contest yields, the yield trend is more like about 1 bushel. Can you flip it forward for me?
It's not.
Are you there, Mike?
Yeah, it's not forwarding for me.
Well, I'll keep going until maybe you get it to work for you.
There it goes.
There we go. So if we look at our contest participation over 28 years, we see that it's going up a little bit over 1 bushel, 1.5 bushels per acre per year, and that's due to management of all our entries. So it definitely spending a little bit of time on what you're doing in the field can return dollars back to the farm. So Mike, go ahead and flip it. The other part is that we do see trends too. When the first started keeping records on production in 2010, you can see our seeding rates were about 180,000 for those top yields. And the way this chart is we have the median is the middle, the top producers are the winners, and then the bottom are the lower trends. So when we look at seed drop, the actual seed drop dropped about 25,000 plants per acre from the beginning to what we're seeing right now. So that's kind of probably what Shawn was referring to, is that we're seeing this general trend towards lower soybean planting in a full season, early planted environment. Okay, go ahead and flip it. And we also see the same trend as far as the planting date. Those entries that were planted before May 10th in our geography are usually the ones that end up winning the contest. And that's basically a testament to a couple things. One would be the conditions with the climate getting a little bit warmer. We're seeing that change to earlier planting just because our climate is a little bit warmer. And also the technologies like seed treatments that allow for planting where you have water molds primarily. So that we'll get into a little bit in the on-farm section. So go ahead and flip it. Row spacing, that always comes into play. And most of the plantings were in 15-inch rows. That's been a change from, you can see back to when it first started, it was mostly a drill. And today, now we're seeing mostly 15-inch rows. So that's kind of an interesting trend in the growers that are there. Go ahead. So this year in our geography, you know, it's been trending to where you got to have over 100 bushels pretty much to win the contest. And Mike, I think if you were the results you sent me, you were in the 90s, right?
And
so
91 won it this year.
Yeah, 91. So you know, these are tremendous yields, and takes a lot of sunlight energy to change them through. But Bob Shear, just north of Lancaster there, it was tight this year between Shear and Charles, but this is our South Central winners. Go ahead and flip to the next one. And then our Central region, it's a different climate. You'll see the maturities change a little bit as we go through, and we've got a 90 bushel yield there. And then in the West, where we don't have a lot of participation, again, a different climate zone, we have a 68 bushel yield. So go ahead and flip it. We only had one entry in the northern tier at 45 bushels, and that's down. I think normally up in that area we have 3 or 4, and they're usually in the 70s. And then in the southeast, you know, we're back up into some higher yields in those areas. So go ahead and flip it. So yield limitations this year, we had a cool, wet spring. And if you didn't get it in that April time window, then it stayed wet, and a lot of them got planted a little bit later than normal. And then we got dry in the middle of the summer, and things slowed down in September. We got most of the harvest done by the first week of October, which if you get your maturities right, we try to get them harvested in September, which opens some windows up for wheat and getting things ready for the next crop. So I think we do still have to do some maturity work in our area. Go ahead and flip. Interesting thing that most of the producers are managing their pH in that 6.4 to 7.4 range. And that's where our highest yields come from, is in that basic pH. I think the average is 6.9. So in my mind, we try to do this on our on-farm network. I just couldn't get the lime trucks to cooperate to try to get strips in the field to get replication, to alter the pH and then go in there and see the yield correlation. But we know that it's been pretty well documented about pH in soybeans. So if you're low in pH, that's one thing you probably need to spend a dime on to get that moving. You can see that a lot of our high yields come from high P and high K environments, so high fertility. And most of the growers did use some sort of foliar fertilizer. We did see a couple of growers in the contest that did put nitrogen on, even though our on-farm results would suggest we typically get a loss. But you can see that this is not research. Remember, this is just a contest and we're just doing trends here. So it's important to differentiate that. On the seed treatment side, That's a big change from the 92 to now. 91% of the entries use a seed treatment, and 96% use rhizobium inoculation. And that's one thing that growers get confused. When I ask, did you treat the seed? They say, oh yeah, I always treat the seed. Well, and it turns out they used a rhizobium inoculant, and that's not a seed treatment per se. That's just a common practice that helps with nodulation and the nitrogen fixation. And so that's a key differential there. If we look at calibrating the seed equipment, we have, this is a bump up. It used to be 50% didn't calibrate. They dropped the seed and went. Now we're getting 75%. So they're, with that 15-inch rows, they're getting off the planter and checking to make sure the drop is correct. Go ahead and flip. The interesting thing here is the average seed drop was 160,000 across all row widths. And then if you look at the plants at harvest, we had about a 35% loss there with 121,000. Pod counts were 58. We did a good job combining with only half a bushel loss. And, you know, this takes a lot of time when you do these supervisions because, you know, while the guy's combining, you're out, you know, taking 3 or 4 areas and scraping back and looking for beans on the ground. And I think that's pretty good combine measurement to have that little loss out the back. Go ahead, Mike. So our mean yield this year was 80. Primarily, we're no-tilling, 65% of the entries, and we're seeing about a split between a drill and a corn planter, and also those planting dates are getting earlier and earlier. We see those top yields in that third week of April, typically through the first week of May, for a lot of those reasons that Shawn discussed earlier. Go ahead. Almost all of our growers are using some sort of GMO. That we've seen a shift now towards using pre-emergent herbicides because of the Palmer amaranth and mare's tail that we're fighting down here. I don't know if you have that up in New York, but when you do get it, if you were on the fence about using residuals, you'll probably end up getting to that point. We didn't see a lot of the growers use the Enlist technologies or the Ingenia, but that probably will be on the uptick for this coming season. We don't see, we see more of a combination of foliar fungicide and insecticides. Even though we haven't shown a huge return on that arbitrary spraying, we're still seeing the trend in the field that growers are going over the field. So that's a little bit of a concern that they're really not treating to the pest. They're kind of just putting it out there, and that's really not a good IPM practice, one of the pillars. Okay, go ahead and flip. So I broke down these. I'll maybe spend a little bit more time here. You know, one of the things we can get the yield, but then you can see what some of these folks are doing. So just study this a little bit. We have these available online if you want to digest this a little bit more because of our time constraint today. But if you just look through the variability of what if they're using seed treatments, inoculation, their practices, their pH, all of those kind of things in these high yield fields, usually you can glean something that makes sense. But a lot of variability in how people do things. We even have a 30-inch row grower, and so they do vary. But if you had time, you could study and see what they're actually doing to achieve some of these yields. Go ahead, Mike. So that was my soybean contest update. I'm going to have Mike switch over to our on-farm network update for just a brief minute, if I can. And I do apologize that I had a technological failure. But if we go electric in the future, I don't think you should drive a car in the snow, because I did a drive-in theater style meeting and we had a little bit of snow, and I think maybe that got onto my computer. I do see a little bit of rust on my side port, so maybe that's what caused the problem. But if we go electric in the future, I don't know. I'm a little concerned about how that's going to operate. So, Mike, if you can bring that other one up.
Trying, it's not.
Oh, I see a screen there.
Yep, there we go. But is it the end?
Oh,
No, that's that one.
no. Well, keep finding it. I'm going to just talk a little bit briefly about some of our on-farm findings here. Number one, over the last 6 or 7 years, there's been little. I mentioned the fungicide, insecticide treatments, but after several years of doing, I think, a little over 400 side-by-sides with the fungicide, insecticide versus none, we generally, I would say, 4 out of the 5 years, we did not return money back to the program. So the return on investment wasn't there. However, with something like white mold, we did see significant increases in yield that paid dividends for using an effective compound on white mold. And I have that on a slide, but I just can't show it right now. But we had 4 locations, and I think it was average of 11 bushels per acre. These 4 locations all had white mold that we identified in the field at the time of spraying. The pest was there, we treated, and they got an average of 11 bushel increase. So it did work. I had great visual pictures of the differential there. That's one of the glories of the on-farm network of growers, is if we can identify fields with certain conditions, then we can test appropriate technologies to control things that way. On the population side, we dropped, for 3 years, we dropped 25,000, 50, 75, 100, and 125,000 plants per acre of soybeans in the spring, early planting. And from 50 to 125, there was no differential in yield. And it really matched up nicely with our replant, that if you're below 90,000, we recommend a replant scenario. So you have some wiggle room there, but if you have a field that's really uniform and it's low in population, those beans will pod out. We didn't have bush beans, but the average of the 25,000 was 280 pods per plant. And it took forever to count those plots. So that's when we brought it to the network, we dropped 100, 130 and 160, 140, I'm sorry, 130, 160 for most farms, and no differential in the yield. So definitely the lower population there. So I was going to show that trend. When we looked at a few different things that Paul Esker is really excited about with seed treatments, and he's really trying to get an idea of where in the state we have more preponderance of Pythium versus Phytophthora versus Rhizoctonia. Those are different water molds. And lo and behold, up in that northern tier, up in Bradford County, Tioga, Potter County, they do have a lot more of the Rhizoctonia. Where down in my area, Lancaster, Lebanon, we were having more Pythium. And in the western part of the state, they had more Pythium. So it's kind of interesting there, because when you're picking your seed treatments, not all fungicide seed treatments are effective on all of the water molds. So it's important to look at that. And that kind of led into what we call the GIP, which is good inoculation practices. And I got this idea when I was visiting Brazil. In Brazil, rather than paying for the seed treatment on the seed, so you just buy your beans plain, then they use the planter. They put a little 15, 20 gallon tank on there, run 2 or 3 gallons of water in. They run their liquid rhizobium. They run their fungicide, insecticide, depending on what they need in the field. So if they put fresh manure on and they know they might have seed maggots, they can run an insecticide on that field. If not, they can pull it out and just run a fungicide if it's planted early, or if it's planted late, they can not include that at all and just run the rhizobium. So this way you avoid all of the mess trying to get beans treated. All the money goes into what you need in the field. So we're testing that here. And one product that we're testing is actually an azospirillum, which has been shown to, in the agronomy journal, to increase the root mass by about 20. And that gives you more exchangeable sites for the rhizobium to infect. And in Brazil, they use a lot of azospirillum because, remember, Brazil, they got pHs in the 4 or 5, so they have a real challenge to get these things going. Okay, here we have it.
Yeah,
All right, just let's
Brady's
click
been over my shoulder.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This was actually amazing in a 5-minute discussion to get this pulled off here. But anyway, I was on this train of thought with the JIP, but the increase in the root mass that you get from the azospirillum theoretically is going to increase your sites for rhizobium to infect, and so we're testing that at the moment. I would say that I can't see a difference between the inclusion of that versus straight rhizobium by itself. However, in Brazil, they were adding molybdenum as well. And so I did add that to our treatments, and we got a significant response from the inclusion of molybdenum, which we knew in the States since probably the 60s that was true. And so the inclusion of a 1/4 pound of sodium molybdate, we did increase the soybean yields at the end of the year. So let's get back here. Let's see if I have some visuals. Go ahead and flick through here, Mike. This is just a background of our network. We have a lot of agents and specialists involved. We have a whole team of people that are doing microbiome research, which is sort of a new fancy thing, but we're doing the plots out on the farm. And while we're there, we go ahead and collect a whole bunch of specimens and soil at different key growth stages of the soybeans, and it has to be at the right growth stage. And that goes up to this team that's up at Penn State, and then they test for all kinds of different pathogens. And there's some really neat things that Dr. Esker's come up on the plant pathogens in the microbiome, which is right around the seed. Go ahead and flip it. We do have a website, folks, that you can go to, and you can tap on those soybean contest results that I discussed, as well as the 10 or 15 years of our on-farm data that might have some interest to you. Go ahead and flip. This is a copy of our past results. And if you just zoom in on the table of contents there, we've tried a lot of things. One grower mentioned on here about increasing the height to the first pod, and we were able to do that with Rise Up, which is a gibberellic acid. It's been documented in the agronomy journal since 1969. And actually, I still get calls on this. They're throwing it in some of the foliar stuff just to get a little, it'll increase the height of the plant. All it does is it elongates the cells. So Greg Roth and I had the idea, well, in double crops, we always have beans that are just right tight to the ground. So rather than changing to a really long maturity, we sprayed the Rise Up on right as the beans were coming out of the soil. And lo and behold, we got about a 2.5 height increase in the set to the first pod. So, and that ended up being about 2 bushels per acre higher in yield. But when we took it to the on-farm growers, they said they're not going to do it. They don't care. It's another pass over the field. The product cost about 10 or 12 bucks an acre, and they thought they just take it and leave the pods close. But if you're really having an issue raising that pod site, that might be a fit for that particular product if it comes down in price anyway. On the fertility side, we cannot get any responses from the foliar fertilization. Growers are using it. In fact, when we did some boron and P&K, we actually we burned the beans at a critical stage at the R2, R3 stage, and we ended up getting a yield loss. And that brings up another point, burning beans. We did the Cobra work. That was back in the, when Kip Colors was winning and he was burning his beans. We tried the Cobra and we lost 2.5 bushels per acre, significantly different at the P10 level. So we, that was not something we recommend to try to boost yields, especially if you don't have irrigation. We tried biostimulants, all different kinds from that are out there, and they cost a lot of money, and we can't get consistent results out of those. So there's no surprises there. Let's go to the next slide here. I already mentioned that, this is our fungicide work over the years, and we just can't get an economic return. Only 2 out of the number of years that we actually got some kind of return on our investment. So arbitrarily spraying probably is not going to pay. If it makes you feel good at night, then that's the cost of doing business, but we'd rather not have those out in the environment. Okay, flip the next one. Here's the populations slide. And I just took this because, most growers, if you looked at 25,000 or 125,000, you'd be saying I'd want to replant everything. And actually those ended up being just fine. Go ahead and flip. This is the summary slide I pulled out from 2016 to 2018. And we're done with that. But if you look at where we start to plateau on this graph, I don't know how well it shows up on your screen, but somewhere around 80,000. So this is basically our yield is on the left, and on the bottom is our population. So down in the 20,000 versus getting up to over 120. And then you can see the correlation between yield and if you drop down to population. And right about 80,000 is where we start to flatten off there. And so that's the key number to keep in your head, at least on your heavy soil. We need to really look at our lighter soil, our shaly soil. I think that population, this might be inverse to that. We might actually see this plateau higher in population. So that's something that we need to look at next. All right, go ahead, Mike. So to finish up here and I know I'm over time, but if you look at and study this chart, this is the probability of a response from different management things that you can manage as a grower. And we've seen rotational effects with soybeans. That's a high probability that if you change a rotation, it's going to impact the soybeans. Same with the cover crop. We averaged 3 bushels in our on-farm network where we had bare ground versus rye. Definitely a response there. When we looked at manure, if you look at this, we actually lost yield. We used dairy manure, poultry manure, and hog manure. In all 3 examples, we lost yield, and those are in those results if you want to get the specifics. Obviously, pH. We don't see much response from phosphorus, but potassium definitely in the soil. You have to keep that in the optimum. We don't see responses from foliar fertilizers or micronutrients. So those are low probability that you're going to get the return on that. On the seeding, obviously our varieties, we see a 20 bushel difference between the top and the low variety yield. So that's definitely a key driver that if you spend some time on varieties. We're seeing the planting date definitely affects the response, reducing the seeding rate, getting more air movement. That can also be a potential area. We don't see any difference in planting types. We see responses with rhizobium. I didn't get a chance to show you the JIP, but the untreated versus having rhizobium in there is sort of critical. It's a very low investment. So even if you get 1.5 bushels, it does return to management. Fungicide, insecticides, where you have a pest, definitely return to management. Molybdenum, we've established that. NPK, nope. Growth promoters, probably not going to get a huge response. Obviously, pest management, your weed control is critical. And then your foliar fertilizers, we're not seeing a lot of that. We did establish the gibberellic acid in the soybeans for height to first pod, but other than that, it's you got to be careful with the GAA, especially if it's late, because it can also cause flower abortion. So, and finally, the leaf burning idea is that's a low probability of return. So I think I'll finish there. I hopefully got a little bit of a highlight. This year we did some slug monitoring, which we could get into if I had more time. We're also doing yield limiting factors. And we'll have another year of that, Mike, that we can report some pretty neat things there, where we're going into these growers' fields that you see on the map, and we pick a high area and a low area. And then what we do is we go in and intensively sample the low and the high, and then look at the differential there. Why is there a high or a low yielding area? And actually, a lot of it's coming out to be some fertilizer variation, but there is also microbiome changes too in those two areas. So that's kind of a neat thing. So keep abreast of things. If I think I might have a picture of a couple fields in here. No, let's just finish with that, because these are all basic background things on diseases. So I think I'll finish there, Mike, and entertain any questions that anybody might have.
Yeah, let's see, I didn't put some Q&A here. I'll just pick one. When is the best time to apply Molly?
So we did it on the seed, Mike, as well as over the top at the first trifoliate. And we didn't see a difference in the yield enhancement. So it's just, you have to get it on. If you do it too late before the nodulation process ends, you're going to miss that window. So either you put it on the seed with the seed, or you spray it on. One of the two ways.
What's your use control white mold? What's been your best product?
So we tested the product called Approach.
Yep.
And the active ingredient is
We use Approach up here.
I can't remember the active ingredient. Anyway, we used Approach at flowering time at R2, and then we had one site that did R2, and then 14 days later. And but I can get you that data, but that's what we used.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
No response.
There is other white mold products out there, but that's the one that we tested on the on-farm network.
Okay. Kathy Zappella says Conley said replant. Don't replant with greater than 50. Dell says below 90,000 to replant. So just a difference of opinion.
Yeah, I think he's probably correct. Greg and I were not ready to drop our replants based on the 3 years, because we really would like to do the same thing on shale, Mike.
Yeah.
So if you look at my trend lines there, you get to about 80,000 and it plateaus there. So our thought is, if you start to get below that, and it really comes down on replants, is how even it is in the field. If I had a 50,000 stand and it was uniform across the field, I think you're going to get uniform pod set. But if you have bare spots, then I think you've got to go in and address it.
Well, yeah. Del, there's a couple more we got to move. I got a lot of catching up to do. So.
Okay, Mike. Sorry.
I appreciate it, Del.
Have a great day.
You too. Take care, buddy.
Yeah.
Okay. Hoping everybody can see that. Brandy, can you see that? All right, guys. I'm going to clean us up here. We're obviously over time, but I'll try to cut this short on some of the wheat stuff here. Want to kind of give us a summary for what we heard about Wisconsin, we heard about Pennsylvania, we heard about Michigan yesterday. What about New York? And for us, this last year, we averaged 66 bushel, which was better than 2019, 3 bushel better. I mean, we'd love to get that above 70 every year. But yeah, we had some tough areas with the weather this year. 120,000 acres this year. It was a lot for us. That's one of our highs. And that was up 54,000 from 2019. We had a lot of preventative plant the year before. So big numbers for us. And going into the winter, what did we look like? The last NASS USDA Northeastern Field Report, which was on November 29th. They said that 96% of the wheat was planted, which is pretty darn good. Didn't give me how many acres, but 96 was planted, 93% was emerged. And at that time, 74% was in good to excellent condition. So from what I'm seeing there, we went into the winter in pretty good shape for our wheat. We've had some cold temperatures now. Most of us have some snow, which is going to help us put that blanket on our snow. But early on, we had a couple evenings that were cold with our wheat. So hopefully it's under the blanket and we're good to go. Just a couple of things. So it's in the ground, just to think about in the spring, some things that we've looked at over the last couple of years. We're always out there counting tillers per square yard. And, guys are doing anywhere from 60 to 90 units of nitrogen. If you have low tillers, we want to, most of that at green up, obviously. 60 of it at green up, and the rest, if you're going to apply more at that elongation stage, we get 450 to 600, 45 of it down at green up, the rest of it at growth stage 5-6. And for above 700, most of the, recommendations would tell you all of it should go on at growth stage 5-6, sort of what Dwight said yesterday, that he doesn't put any at green up. All of it goes on there at growth stage 5-6. But I've had a couple guys that we get weather that's rainy, they can't get out, and wheat starts turning yellow just because it runs out of juice. And so I have guys, even with high numbers, automatically put 30 units on it green up just to prevent some of that from happening. Stream bars, the best thing we ever had here in New York, not high sensitive. Again, we're not burning things. It's just nice. Obviously, you have to do a separate pass with fungicide or with herbicide, which is extra dollars, but these stream bars have really performed well here in New York. This is what happens sometimes when you can mix. You spray on herbicides with your nitrogen. We get a lot of burning. If we have harsh conditions, this is really going to hurt our wheat. Now, if we had rainfall after this and good growing conditions, maybe not so much. But I don't want my wheat looking like this. I'm going to put it in the ground. Early fungicides, we've heard a little bit about this, from Dwight talking about the copper he puts down early. For us, any kind of propiconazole or tilt, if it's needed. This is powdery mildew right here. This obviously is getting up into the upper canopy. This would probably be beneficial to put something like a propiconazole on early. But last year, again, we didn't have a real wet season during this period. I didn't see a lot of powdery mildew. Maybe we could have got by without putting that on. Later fungicides, flag leaf in particular. This, you heard a couple of things mentioned about stripe rust. This is early stripe rust. This was in 2018. You see these yellow patches out there, and it was covering the flag leaf. This year, I saw one situation in Seneca County where we had stripe rust that was bad enough to go up on the flag leaf, needed to be sprayed. We know our later fungicides, and Gary has said this for years, the most beneficial time to put a fungicide on is going to be, at flowering, from the standpoint of preventing head scab. So really that is the more important timing for us. But something like this hits us a little earlier, you have to go out here and take care of that stripe rust. And, being the bug guy, I can't go by without talking about bugs. Jody and I will monitor for a common armyworm here early on with our traps. Remember, they're not here now. They fly up from the south. So we'll be monitoring those. And through our crop alerts here in the spring, we'll be letting people know what populations are coming up and how much you should be looking for these guys, scouting for these in your wheat. We know what kind of damage these things can do. So they're not to be, looked at lightly and should be out in the field well monitored. A couple herbicide updates since last time I've talked about this. We had Axial XL a couple years ago for annual grass control in winter and spring wheat and barley. mainly for grass such as the foxtails, barnyard grass, Italian ryegrass, and volunteer oats, which, you know, sometimes if you're following wheat after oats can get pretty woolly in there if it's early planted. There now is an axial bold, which is an update from axial and the fact that to panoxidin, it adds phenoxyprop. So another mode of action group 1. So it's a 1-in-1, but from what I'm reading, better control, less product and better control on these. But again, it's early, folks. It's emergence to jointing stage. And sometimes that can go very quick depending on temperature. So you got to be very careful getting that on timely. We talked a little bit about Husky. Just wanted to mention it again here that we still have that special local needs for winter wheat in New York. And it's mainly for our resistant mare's tail. And we got lots of that out there. Lots of guys are using this mixed with Harmony Extra and finding it very effective. Last year, for some reason, it was hard to find in some areas. So I just want to make sure that you're looking to use that to make sure you have that supply of that. And again, that can be applied, you know, up to the flag leaf stage. And the last one here, Osprey, an old friend. We've been using that for many years for control suppression of ruststock bluegrass and sheet. Went away for us. So Osprey by itself was not being made anymore by Bayer. And last year, it wasn't, you couldn't find it unless you had it and you found it and you had it saved, or there was still some left in the supply channel if you wanted to spray it. This year, last fall, we got a new label for Osprey Extra. So what that did, it wasn't, Osprey was just mesosulfuron. Now they added that thicarbazone, which again gives us a little extra kick. And again, though, that's one that's early for grass control, that emergence to jointing stage. So we got to do that early on before it gets too late. Every year I talk about the National Wheat Contest and I push and get folks in there. Mainly for us, there's 4 categories, but we're looking at winter dry land for winter wheat. This started in 16, 17 and 18. I couldn't get anybody involved because it was a percentage above county average, which really doesn't do well for us out here. It benefits more the folks out the far west to have really low county averages. So yeah, I can see no interest in that. But in 2019, they added another section, which was just raw yield for that. We didn't have any entries for us in 2019 in New York. 2020, they had 418 entries, which is the most they've ever had. To do this, you have to be a National Association Wheat member. Everything is done just like the National Corn Congress contest. Everything's online. It's $100 by April 1st, $125 by May 15th. No, certified seed only, 5 continuous acres, just like the corn contest. Need a harvest supervisor. Harvest 1.5 acres, a little bit bigger than the corn, which is 1.25 acres. And there is a reweigh thing. So 150 bushel, you got to take the next rows over for that 1.5 acres. So just wanted to show some numbers that actually potentials that are out there, particularly the far west. Bruce Riddenlaw out of Oregon, 191 bushel. John Dixon, Washington, almost 190. I mean, again, every year I say this, I'd love to walk through a field like that and see what it's like to walk through almost 200 bushel wheat. Idaho was 3rd at 180. But look, folks, we're reaching out here on the raw yields. We're competing out here to the east. So Nick Swin, who is the main competitor for Dwight Bartle that you heard from yesterday, had a phenomenal year at 170 right in Michigan. And again, Dwight's top was 147 this year, so he got him pretty good. And in Pennsylvania, Darren Grumbine, 152. So just to our south there. So there's some good numbers in the national top 5 right here around us. Just some other state winners here. Pennsylvania had the best year I've seen them have in the last 4. The top 3 being 152, 148, 137. Eric Ackus out of New Jersey, he throws big numbers every year, 132 this year. There's Nick at 170, and then Nancy and Dwight Barlow at 147 and 140 there in Michigan. So some great numbers. Folks, these are all doable numbers for us. I've seen people hit this in fields, let alone just 1.5 acres. So I keep encouraging that and keep encouraging it. And finally, we had somebody in New York that actually went all the way through and actually entered the contest and actually, did it supervisor and turned it in. And so Matt Toussaint in Orleans County, and he gave us a great starting number, almost 111 bushel. Okay, so I called Matt and I thanked him. I don't know if he's on the call today, but that's a great benchmark for us, folks. I mean, we know that's beatable. He said he had better wheat right next to this in another the adjacent field. So this is beatable, but it's a great benchmark for all you guys to say, hey, you know, let's get out there and do this. So it's giving us something to strive for and to keep going higher in our yields. If you're wondering, that was Erie. So one of our local public wheats there. The high winter, just to show you how high we can go in Washington there, 206.7 was irrigated winter wheat. The last 4 years, the irrigated side has been anywhere from 200 to 212 bushel out there, usually in Washington or Idaho. So that is phenomenal. Those are the kind of numbers that you're seeing in the UK, who traditionally grow, you know, these big numbers for wheat for that. So I flew through some of that and we're right at 12 o'clock, okay? I had some other soybean stuff, but we're gonna hold that, I think. I'll throw maybe one slide out there. I want to throw out this though for our virtual forage Congress. Jody Putman has put this together here for March 11th. Little different, same scenario, virtual 10 to 12, but just for one day. So four presentations on the 11th. And again, single day for that. So look for that. That is now on our website. So you can go and look at that. I want to show just a couple slides here. The soybean contest, you know, 51 bushel this year for New York, up 3. That's phenomenal. 312,000 acres harvested this year, up 87,000. So that shows you how bad our 2019 year was. 220 looks tremendous. I'm going to go through some of these. West region, since we're out here, the contest winners from region goes by group, maturity group. Didn't have any group zeros. Group 1 this year, Jim Starowitz, right here in Genesee County where I'm at, 82 bushel. Group 2 winner was Ryan Swede, almost 90 bushel. Group 3 was Todd Roberts in Orleans County at almost 82 bushel. In the Finger Lakes region, since most of the other folks on this group are from Finger Lakes, no group 0, but Ethan Humbert from Wayne at 78. Pitt Farms, also from Wayne at 92.22. And the group 3 winner was Emery Aussie Segal in Seneca at 70 bushel. Now the other one I want to show is the finalists, okay? So group 1 was Pitt Farms there at 91.22. Overall state, second was Ryan Swede at almost 90. And third was Scott Schwartz in Rensselaer at 88.79. And just to show, this will be our last slide, just to show you the top 10 here in New York this year, because some of these folks throw some big numbers, but unfortunately they don't get the top 3 and they don't win the top maturity group. Again, the top couple we've seen, but John Havener out there in Oneida at 4th at 88. Jake Dates and Wayne at 87. Eric Lyne threw 2 big numbers this year, 87 and 86. Adam Kirby just north here at almost 86. Paul Campbell to the south there in Tioga, almost 85, and another one for Ryan Sweet. So guys, these are some fantastic numbers. The biggest numbers we've seen. I think we had 16 entries over 81 bushel this year out of 57 that were submitted. So phenomenal, great year for us. It shows, you know, and whoever got the rain, the numbers followed for them. So just want to put a shout out to these guys and congratulations to these top winners for soybeans this year. So with that, we're going to end. Okay. I'm going to stop my share here. So for us, we appreciate everything today. You know, it was kind of crazy here at the end, but that's expected. You know, we got lucky yesterday and everybody made it in and nobody dropped. Today, not so much. So again, I want to thank our sponsors for sticking with us through the virtual season. I hope next year we can get you back in the booths and get everybody in person back talking to you. You guys can now go down to the chat box. That link will be down there. Do the same thing you did when you checked out. Click on there, name and number, and that should be good for you. The CCA is up. You guys that need to scan can scan. Those folks that do not have the app can either take a picture of this or I can email you this slide and you can fill it out online to take care of that. Other than that, I think we're good. A reminder, the Forage Congress again is we can go on our webpage and see that on March 11th. Again, thanks to our speakers. Thanks for sticking with us This is, this has been a long journey for Corn Congress and Soybean Congress virtually. A lot of you guys have learned a ton when it comes to computers and Zoom. I hope you continue to go online and continue your learning on Zoom. It's not going to go away, folks. It's going to continue. And so what you've learned, don't lose it. Keep working at it and keep educating yourself here over the winter months. Planting season will be here before we know it. So with that, everyone have I can't say a safe drive home, but have a great rest of the week. And we'll see you in April when we start planting. Take care.